We are living in an era of seismic challenges. Our global food system faces never-before-seen stresses, from the climate crisis, population growth, and fractured supply chains.
But might these shocks to our system actually be a catalyst for positive change? This is just so incredible.
I'm on a journey to witness for myself.
Oh, look at this!
How farmers, scientists, and innovators are radically reimagining how we grow our food and produce it.
I feel like I'm in a space station and super perfect lettuce has just magically appeared from the heavens. It's a quest to meet the greatest challenges that are facing humanity.
We have to wake up and we have to feed the world. That's a big job.
And create a new and better food future.
In this episode, the climate clock is ticking. With every minute that passes, approximately 100,000 tons of greenhouse gases are released into the atmosphere, driving global temperatures even higher. But with roughly half the planet's habitable land dedicated to feeding us, might agriculture be uniquely placed to turn back the clock?
I want to know how this vital industry can leverage its sheer scale to not only reduce, but even reverse its impact on the environment, all while producing epic yields to feed a growing population.
Over 50 million square kilometers of land is used to grow crops and livestock. And in New York State, Hudson Carbon are studying how farmland has the power to draw carbon dioxide, our most prevalent greenhouse gas, out of the atmosphere and trap it underground.
So Matt, I'm sure you're doing something incredibly smart, but to me, it kind of looks like you're doing fake farming because you're driving up and down, but nothing's coming out the back.
Right.
What's going on?
Yeah. Well, this is a soil variability scanner measuring the variability in soil texture and in organic matter in this field.
In order to grow, plants need to draw carbon out of the atmosphere to aid photosynthesis. In the process, carbon becomes sequestered, i.e. captured and locked away either in the above-ground parts of the plant or underground in its root structure. The more carbon locked away, the less there is in the air warming up our climate.
So is there a way to actually look underground and visualize what's really happening?
Yeah, we can pull a core sample if you'd like.
Our giant apple corer.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's have a go. Right. Okay, wow.
There we go. The first thing I notice is roots. Second thing is you have a very distinct color change, sort of right around here, where you have topsoil that's much darker.
And that's a relatively good indicator of carbon content, that darker coloration.
Exactly. And in and around the roots, you can see this very dark
Look at that.
carbon-based material forming, and that's
little black freckles.
Yeah, it's very distinct.
So that carbon would be, once upon a time, floating around in the atmosphere, contributing to climate change, and is now locked in the soil and can stay in the soil for thousands of years.
Exactly.
With the vast amounts of land dedicated to agriculture around the world, the potential is there to draw down huge amounts of carbon, maybe even enough to help the world get to net zero and beyond. And that has a value not just to our environment, but also potentially to our farmers.
So tell me about carbon markets. How do they work?
So a carbon market is essentially trying to place value on the act of drawing carbon down from the atmosphere.
So if you're a company selling, let's say, face cream, and you want to sell it as carbon neutral, there are two things you can do. One is reduce your emissions, but it's not always possible to reduce them to zero.
Right.
And the other one is paying for someone else to offset them, so transferring some of that responsibility somewhere else.
Precisely, yeah.
Matt and the team's mission is to create an accurate and standardized measure of soil carbon capture for use in the rapidly growing carbon market business. And farmers could become the beneficiaries by adopting agricultural practices that emit less greenhouse gases, that draw down and trap more carbon. They can sell their carbon credits and get financially rewarded for their good work. And making sure that fighting climate change is a profitable business could be key to turning back the climate clock.
Hey Bertrand, how are you doing?
Hi James, very good, and you?
Yeah, really good. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bertrand Piccard is an explorer, psychiatrist, and ambassador for clean technologies. He founded the Solar Impulse Foundation, which has identified 1,000 efficient solutions to protect the environment in a profitable way.
So you have this incredible variety of different solutions that you're working on, 1,000 different solutions. How important are agricultural ones in that context?
So we're very, very active into the world of agriculture in terms of saving resources, saving water, using less fertilizers, having really new ways to produce, but also new ways to preserve the harvest, and of course, better ways to consume in order to waste less. People think the problem is too big and has no solution, and people do nothing. So what I try to do is to do the opposite. I want to show that it's a fascinating and exciting adventure to solve climate change, that there are thousands of solutions, and these solutions are financially profitable. If you come to the big industry people and the heads of states and you say we have to protect the environment, they will tell me, yes, I know, but it's too expensive. And we cannot have degrowth. So you need to speak their language. When I go and see them, I say, I have solutions that create jobs, make profit for the industry. And by the way, they protect the environment. And then they welcome me with arms open.
One aspect of farming that Bertrand's foundation thinks could be a revolutionary solution for fixing climate change in a profitable way is to rethink fertilizer production. However important fertilizers have historically been for increasing yields to feed growing populations, we now know that the production and use of many has resulted in significant greenhouse gas emissions. Now, though, there are moves across agriculture to develop new ways of using less or to find alternatives. In the UK, CCM Technologies have developed a radical alternative. They're capturing carbon dioxide emissions from industrial power generators that would ordinarily escape into the atmosphere and combining it with other industrial waste streams like ammonia from sewage treatment plants and the residue from anaerobic digesters.
This is food that's been through a digestion process, so all the energy's been removed from it, and all that's left is carbon and some nutrients.
The result is a potent, nutrient-rich fertilizer and soil conditioner that they claim has a carbon footprint of 80% less than existing market equivalents.
And that is the final product. Here we have a balanced formulation of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, plus a range of micro-ingredients. But unlike conventional fertilizers, pretty well half this pellet is made up of organic materials as well. And those organic materials make sure that the nutrients work best in the soil, and so they're more efficient in the way that they work with the plant, which means you can apply less of this fertilizer as well.
With over 3 billion acres of land around the world used to grow our food, changing the inputs that we use in farmland could be transformative. But to turn back the climate clock, we may also need to change the crops we grow. At the Land Institute in Kansas, they've identified that when it comes to drawing down carbon, some plants are better than others.
We are in an all-hands-on-deck moment in human history on this planet. The kinds of agriculture based upon annual grains that feed humans right now are not sustainable for the long term.
Currently, 70% of all crops grown are annual grains, meaning that they're replanted every season. As a consequence, the carbon drawdown when they grow is largely just released back into the atmosphere. So here they're trying to develop perennial versions of our most important grain crops whose roots would stay undisturbed after harvest and grow back every year.
When we perennialize agriculture, we can reintroduce perennials to these soils, establish deep roots that have the potential to begin sequestering carbon again and increase the carbon in the soils. And we also remove some of the reduction and loss of carbon because we're no longer tilling and disturbing the soil. So we increase carbon sequestration, and we also reduce the carbon loss. In this particular field, what you see is a perennial wheat crop nursery of different hybrids of perennial wheatgrass, a wild relative, crossed with annual wheat, the crop that we all know and love and eat on a daily basis. And what Land Institute scientists and collaborators around the world are trying to do by making and testing these crosses is to create a new perennial wheat crop. Ultimately, in the long term, because the majority of the world's croplands are in grain production, our goal is to have those croplands in perennial grain production around the world.
I've seen how our cropland has the potential to draw down carbon out of the atmosphere and lock it away. But currently, over half the world's agricultural land is used exclusively for grazing animals. So next, I want to find out what our livestock farmers are doing to fight global warming and help turn back the climate clock.
Why is it beneficial to cows to have trees to fodder on?
With every minute that passes, 100,000 tons of greenhouse gases are released into the atmosphere. But I want to know if agriculture, with its unique scale and resources, could have the power to help turn back this ticking climate clock. I've seen how our farmland has the potential to draw carbon from the atmosphere and lock it away. But alongside crop production, more than half the world's farmland is used for grazing livestock. With the combination of deforestation to create pasture land and grow feed, and the methane emissions from ruminant animals like sheep and cows, means the livestock industry is agriculture's biggest greenhouse gas emitter. To help reverse the climate clock, livestock farmers are looking for ways to both reduce emissions and, at the same time, capture more carbon from the atmosphere.
So, we've created paddocks in between rows of trees.
So you can tell they love this field.
Yeah, they love coming into the new pasture.
At Eastbrook Farm in Swindon, Ben Raskin is using a technique called silvopasture, which involves grazing livestock amongst trees and bushes, rather than on large, empty pastures.
So if you imagine this before the trees were planted, this is a 45-acre field. It's quite exposed, and it was just grass, so the cows have only got that to eat. With the trees, we've got these perry pears and we've got the timber trees interplanted. We've got willow and alder, and we want to be able to feed the animals that. So as well as improving the soil, we want to improve the welfare, productivity and diet of these cows as well.
Why is it beneficial to cows to have trees to fodder on? Because you think of cows eating grass.
Well, most animals will be able to include some tree browse in their diet. So for cows, 15 to 40% of their diet could be from trees. And studies have shown, for instance, that willow can reduce methane emissions by maybe 20%.
Recent decades have seen an explosion of intensive silvopasture, particularly in Latin America, where many governments are offering payments to ranchers to convert to the system. Some studies have shown that long-term storage of carbon in silvopasture soil is up to 5 times higher than in managed grassland alone, not to mention the carbon stores in the trees themselves.
Presumably, as these things are growing, they're going to be sequestering a large amount of carbon in their branches and leaves.
Branches, leaves, roots, and even the fungi in the soil that then builds up underneath the tree, that's all sequestering carbon.
Integrating trees can also mean extra profit. Milk and meat yields have been shown to go up, and supplementary crops like nuts and fruits can be grown alongside the livestock.
You know, if someone could invent a really clever air filter that was capable of literally sucking dangerous greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and converting them into all kinds of clever, useful objects like fertilizers or feed for cattle or shelter for humans or beautiful, useful objects, it would be hailed as an absolute game changer. But we already have that technology. There's a field of them right behind me. They're trees.
Silvopasture is just one of the many ways that farmers and scientists are trying to tackle farming's carbon footprint. All around the world, projects are underway to try and use agriculture to help turn back the climate clock. At the University of Illinois, I'm visiting two very different research projects with two unique solutions. The first is taking a very futuristic look at the problem of increasing CO2.
Oh. So we've now stepped into the atmosphere of 2050.
That's right, the carbon dioxide concentration of 2050.
Lisa Ainsworth is part of an experimental project called SoyFace, where for the last 20 years, they've been growing vital food crops like soybean under atmospheric conditions set to replicate those predicted in 2050, where CO2 rates will be considerably higher.
So here's what's doing all the hard work here. What have we got here?
Right, so these are pipes that have very small holes in them, and CO2 is released from the holes in those pipes. And that's because the wind right now is coming from the north, and so this is the upwind side of the ring. And the CO2 is delivered into the wind, and then the wind carries the gas over our treatment, and that's how it's delivered to the plants.
You can actually feel it and hear it when you run your fingers along this. And you can almost like play it like a flute. Yeah, look at that. So tell me what kind of results you're beginning to see as part of these experiments.
So one of the things that we know is that in the absence of other stresses, so temperature stress or drought stress, elevated CO2 can increase soybean yields by 10 to 15%.
10 to 15% is a really dramatic increase in yield. I was almost expecting that if I was to step into the world by 2050, that these crops would look terrible. They'd be, you know, senesced, they'd be brown and crisp, the kind of worst case scenario. But they're looking relatively healthy. Is that a sign that we don't have to worry as much about what we think might happen?
Well, all we've changed here is the CO2 concentration. We haven't changed the temperature and we haven't changed the precipitation. So when you change temperature or precipitation in combination with CO2, the results can be very different. If we actually go to 2050, there's going to be much higher temperatures and water availability will likely be reduced during the hottest time of the growing season. And we've done that in this field. We've used infrared heaters to heat the canopies, or heat the leaves of the plants. We've used awnings where we catch the rain and guttering systems to bring the rain off of the plants. And when you add drought or you add temperature to elevated CO2, then the results can be very different.
Predicting how plants react to increased CO2 in the future could be a lifesaver if our climate continues to deteriorate. But to try and prevent this from happening, elsewhere on the university site, experiments are underway to help find methods to fight it, including treating the farmland with something called rock dust.
It almost looks like cement or something like that. You can see that it's been ground down to a really fine tilth. But what is rock dust?
Well, so the rock dust that we're sitting on right now is basalt. It's a type of basalt. It's a volcanic rock. It's generally a waste. It's a byproduct of the mining industry, and we're trying to find a use for it that can help benefit both agriculture and global carbon cycle.
Carl and his team from the Leverhulme Center for Climate Change Mitigation are spreading basalt onto fields to find out if, amongst other things, it can boost carbon sequestration in the soil.
How could it benefit climate change? I find, ground up rocks aren't the first thing I think of.
That's a good question. And so I guess there are two answers to this. The first is because it has some potential amendments that benefit the plants, you end up with better plant productivity, bigger plants, higher yields, ultimately more carbon in the ecosystem.
So the bigger and faster a plant grows, the more carbon it's sucking out of the atmosphere and turning it into its tissues.
Absolutely, and those tissues, a lot of them, end up in the soil, where some of that carbon is going to be stored for long term. But that's not going to be really long term. That's not sequestered in terms of geological time, hundreds of thousands of years. So one potential way for it to benefit the global carbon cycle is really that this basalt, through weathering, can result in carbon dioxide being fixed into bicarbonate in the soil through a chemical process that's linked with the basalt. And that bicarbonate, which is water soluble, ends up moving through the fields, into streams, into the river, ultimately into the ocean, where it can be stored for hundreds of thousands of years.
If the experiments achieve what they hope, it could be a way of taking something that's an industrial waste product and using it for something that's valuable for both farmers' productivity and the global fight to turn back the climate clock.
We know that climate change is already beginning to have a really direct impact on our ability to feed ourselves. So it's perhaps a really wonderful irony that the methods which we use to feed ourselves could not only help slow, but potentially even reverse it. There are literally thousands of solutions out there. We just have to find the will as a society to take up that offer. Throughout this series, I've just been astounded about the sheer amount of work and dedication that's going on behind the scenes to make food and farming an industry that's fit for the future. Wow! It's like fluorescent pink disco lights in there. Creating these phenomenal efficiencies where once there were none. It's like the devil's jacuzzi. By embracing and integrating new technology. Now this I wasn't expecting. Look at this. And even sometimes flipping old traditions on their head to come up with completely novel solutions. So these are two otherwise perfect identical twins. All you've done is change a single gene.
If we work together, our farmers, scientists, innovators, and us, the consumer, have the chance to make a real difference in the quest to create a more robust, more sustainable, equitable food system for the future.